The heat clung to the land, like sweat on a worn saddle. Dust curled from the gravel driveway as Jackson Avery adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and leaned against the fence, sipping lukewarm coffee from a battered enamel mug. This was his ritual. Sunrise, silence, and a slow scan of his 50-acre ranch on the edge of Clearview Estates. That peace shattered at 10:17 a.m. engines. A convoy of SUVs and sedans snaked through the HOA gate, tires crunching over loose gravel, windows gleaming in the sun. Jackson narrowed his eyes. These weren't neighbors. They were overdressed strangers, stepping out with selfie sticks and wine glasses, wearing pastel polos and floral dresses better suited for a country club than cow pasture. Then he saw her, Karen Withers, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard, in hand like a judge at a dog show. She marched across his property as if she owned it, directing people toward the barn, the goat pen, and even, God help her, the beehives. Jackson dropped his mug. He stormed across the yard, boots slapping, the dry earth, the flap of the chicken coop door echoing as he passed. By the time he reached the barn, a group of teenagers had already climbed onto his hay bales. A toddler chased a chicken. Someone set up a folding table and began unpacking wine bottles. "Karen!" he barked. She turned, fake surprise curling, her lips. "Oh, Jackson, you're here. This is my land. What are all these people doing here?" She waved her clipboard as if it explained everything. "Community outreach. I organized a wellness day. Nature immersion, farm-to-table snacks, and even a goat meet and greet. The HOA approved it last month." Jackson's jaw clenched. "I never approved anything." "Well, it passed by majority vote at the last meeting. You weren't there." "I wasn't there," he said slowly, "because the meetings were moved, without notice." Again. Karen's smile didn't falter. "We're adapting to community needs." "By trespassing?" She tilted her head. "Don't be so rigid, Jackson. Your land's technically part of the Clearview buffer zone now. The new boundary expansion includes shared access to green space. This isn't green space, it's a working ranch. You can't just show up with a wine tasting and a bounce house." Karen chuckled softly, as if he were a child who didn't understand grown-up things. "It's just for the day. These people need fresh air. A little dirt. You should be honored. They're calling it a day on the Avery Ranch. I didn't give you permission to use my name." A scream cut through the air. Jackson turned. A young woman clutched her arm, face twisted in panic. Bees! She'd wandered too close to the hives behind the shed, despite the posted signs. "Bees!" someone shouted. "There are bees!" A crowd gathered in confusion and horror as more guests flailed and ran. One man slipped in the mud near the irrigation line. A kid dropped a plate of hummus near the chicken feeder, setting off a flurry of squawks and feathers. Karen's smile cracked. Jackson stepped closer, voice low and tight. "You brought them here without asking. You put them in danger. And now, you're going to get off my land." Karen's sunglasses slipped slightly as she tried to regain control. "Jackson, don't be dramatic. I'm calling the sheriff." At that, her mask cracked. "You'd really report your own neighbors for celebrating the land?" He didn't blink. "This land's been in my family since before Clearview was anything more than a dusty stop sign, and you just turned it into a petting zoo." Karen huffed, turning on her heels, signaling the others to pack up, but not before she muttered, "You'll be hearing from the board." As the SUVs rolled out and silence returned, Jackson stood alone in the flattened grass. His goats stared at him from behind the fence, visibly agitated. His chickens refused to leave the coop. One of the hives had tipped over. The damage wasn't just physical. It was a line crossed. He knelt beside the beehive, gently righting it, the soft hum of disturbed bees vibrating under his fingertips. They were his allies, resilient, territorial, and fiercely protective. Like him. Karen Withers had just declared war, and she had no idea what kind of man she'd provoked. The following morning, Jackson stood in the shade of his porch, arms crossed, as a white Range Rover rolled to a halt outside his gate. He didn't need a closer look to know who it was. Karen Withers always made an entrance like a peacock. Plenty of color. No humility. She stepped out, high heels clicking on the dirt like she was walking a runway. Her manicure sparkled under the sun, and the clipboard was back, this time held like a weapon. "Jackson," she called, voice sugary and strained. "We need to talk." He stayed on the porch, silent. Karen pressed on. "There's no need for hostility. Yesterday's event was meant to be communal. We had board approval." "You had backroom whispers," he replied. "That doesn't make it legal." She exhaled through her nose. "Fine. Then let's discuss this rationally. The HOA board voted to classify portions of your ranch as community-accessible green space. It's in the expansion plan, pages 7 through 12. We filed the paperwork last month." "I didn't sign anything." "You didn't have to," she said with a practiced smile. "When you purchased this parcel 5 years ago, it was technically zoned under Clearview's secondary development clause. You should have read the fine print." "I did," he said. "And it never included anything about turning my property into a picnic site." Karen's smile thinned. The bylaws were updated in January. Behind closed doors. She ignored that. "The board has authority now. We've received several requests for access to your fields. There's talk of hosting school outings, a local artisan market, even a seasonal harvest fair. This is progress, Jackson." He stepped down from the porch slowly, boots crunching the gravel. "Let me make something real clear. You and your little board think I'm just some out-of-place rancher on land you plan to sterilize and gentrify. But this land isn't your playground. It breathes, it grows, and it bites when cornered." Karen laughed, dismissive, forced. "Are you threatening the HOA?" "No," he said, "but I'm telling you this. Trespass again, and you'll regret it." She left without another word, her SUV kicking up a storm of dust. But Jackson saw the glint in her eyes before she turned. She wasn't backing down. This was about more than bylaws. It was about control. The following week brought an eerie calm. No more visitors, no more surprise SUVs. But Jackson knew better. Karen was regrouping. She didn't take defeat well. She planned, plotted, and struck when her opponents weren't looking. And sure enough, the storm came. On a Thursday afternoon, Jackson returned from checking fence lines to find his front gate wide open. He rode, up fast, boots sliding in the dirt. There they were, 6 strangers, teenagers with skateboards, 2 women taking selfies in his pasture, a man in cargo shorts walking toward the chicken coop with a metal detector, and in the center of it all stood Karen, holding a laminated map. "What the hell is this?" Jackson demanded. "Orientation Day," she replied. "We're beginning. A guided nature walk program. Trial run. Who gave you a key?" Karen gave a tight smile. "Your gate was open. Maybe you forgot to lock it." He stared at her, muscles coiled tight. "You've crossed the line." Karen arched a brow. "Jackson, I understand you're not comfortable with change, but the board has endorsed me to oversee all green space events. We're building community." "This isn't community," he snapped. "This is trespassing. Again. I suggest you adjust your attitude before we report you for obstruction of community initiatives," she said, voice sharp now, venom behind her teeth. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply walked back to the gate, locked it, and pocketed the key. Then he climbed into his ATV, rode out toward the back shed, and opened the enclosure where his bee colonies thrived, 10 hives strong, well-fed, and recently agitated. That night, under the cover of dusk, Jackson made a few careful modifications, a minor adjustment to the hive entrances, a light electric fence around the perimeters. He knew bees, knew how to coax them into calm or chaos. knew when they were at their most defensive. They weren't weapons. No, that wasn't his style. But they were protectors, loyal, territorial, and utterly unforgiving, just like their keeper. He watched the moon rise behind the oaks, listening to the faint hum of wings from the hives. It wasn't the roar of revenge. Not yet. But it was coming. And this time, when Karen tried to invade, again, she'd walk into a storm of her own making. By Saturday morning, the battle lines were drawn. Jackson spent the early hours checking the perimeter, fence wires taut, padlocks secured, trail cameras set. He'd posted fresh private property, no trespassing signs along every visible stretch of the boundary. Then, as insurance, he scattered a few salt blocks and sunflower seeds just shy of the hives. The bees were buzzing harder than usual, stirred by the summer heat and Jackson's strategic baiting. At 10:02 a.m., the disturbance arrived like clockwork. A brass band of minivans and compact SUVs pulled up to the closed gate. Karen Withers was first out, bullhorn in hand, clipboard tucked under her arm. Behind her were 10 or 12 HOA loyalists and their kids, armed with picnic baskets, yoga mats, and a camera crew. The banner unfurled from one of the vehicles read, "Clear View. CARES, Community Reclamation Picnic." Jackson watched it all from his front porch, unmoved. Karen raised the bullhorn and called out, "Jackson Avery, under the Clearview Community Use Clause, Section 4, Subsection B, we are hereby exercising our right to enter and enjoy the shared green space designated by the board as community accessible." He didn't move. She turned to the crowd. "He can't stop us. He's been warned." They climbed the gate. Jackson's jaw tightened as kids clambered over the railings, dragging coolers behind them, adults following with folding chairs and chip bowls. They trotted across his pasture like it was a public park, snapping photos and waving at the camera crew as if it were a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The bees, stirred by the vibrations, took flight. Karen led the group directly toward the rear fields, where the grass turned golden and the soil sloped gently toward the cluster of hives surrounded by sunflower patches and grazing goats. She pointed theatrically at the flowers and shouted, "Isn't this divine? Real country living!" Someone popped a champagne cork. A toddler began chasing a butterfly near the beehives. Jackson walked slowly toward them, boots crunching the dry earth, every step deliberate. "Turn around," he said flatly. Karen barely looked at him. "We're within our rights. This land has been reclassified. Any interference could be viewed as intimidation." "You're playing with fire," he said. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. You have livestock and bugs. We're not hurting anyone." As if on cue, a shrill scream broke through the air. A woman with a flower crown dropped her mimosa as she swatted at something near her neck. Another man yelped and flailed as 3 bees latched onto his exposed calves. Then, chaos unfolded like dominoes. One child cried out. A group of teens sprinted for the fence, and a man dove into the grass as a cluster of bees surged over a dropped fruit tray. The hives had awakened. Karen turned in horror as the air thickened with the rising swarm. "What's happening?" Jackson stepped back, arms crossed. "They don't like crowds." "You did this on purpose." "No, Karen. You did this by barging into their territory without respect or reason. You poked a hive, literally." People were running now, stumbling over chairs, losing sandals, dropping bags. One man tried to wave his shirt like a flag of surrender. Someone's dog howled and darted through the goat enclosure, triggering another wave of panic. The camera crew bolted, tripping over their equipment as bees chased them back toward the gate. Karen stood frozen in the center of the chaos, hair askew, bullhorn forgotten at her feet. She slapped at her arm, then her neck, finally dropping to her knees in a clumsy attempt to duck from the buzzing cloud overhead. Jackson took one step closer and said, low and cold, You thought this land was yours to exploit. You thought the rules didn't apply to you. Now you've learned. They do. Karen scrambled to her feet and ran, arms flailing, as the bees gave chase. Jackson didn't smile. He wasn't vindictive, but he also didn't move to help. He simply walked to the gate, unlatched it, and let the mob spill back out onto the HOA's manicured pavement. He locked the gate behind them and turned the sign to read, "Ranch closed, for good." That night, the ranch was silent again. The bees returned to their hives, and the goats grazed peacefully under a twilight sky. But Jackson knew the real storm wasn't over. Karen wouldn't let public humiliation go unanswered. She'd come back. And next time, she'd bring more than noise and cameras. Next time, she'd try to bring the law. The fallout arrived swiftly, less than 48 hours after the Great Bee debacle, as the HOA Facebook page dubbed it. Karen didn't retreat to lick her wounds. She re-emerged in full battle mode, spinning the incident as an act of biological aggression. Her posts were laced with legal jargon and passive-aggressive indignation, calling Jackson's bees a threat to public safety and demanding emergency board action to sanction the rancher's hostile behavior. On Monday morning, Jackson opened his gate to a different kind of swarm: code enforcement officers, a county zoning inspector, and a local animal control van parked just outside the property line. Leading them all, of course, was Karen Withers, wearing a sun hat this time and a bandage across her wrist like a war medal. "We're here to inspect your livestock, apiary infrastructure, and verify code compliance," one officer said, clipboard in hand. "We've received formal complaints regarding unauthorized beekeeping and potential endangerment." Jackson nodded once, calm as ever. "You have a warrant?" The officer hesitated. "No, but—" "Then you're not stepping foot on my land." Karen stepped forward. "You can't hide behind your gate forever, Jackson. The community has a right to safety. We've filed a cease and desist order with the HOA legal board. Your bees are aggressive. You're operating an unregistered apiary within a community jurisdiction. You're done." He gave her a long look. "You sure you want to go down this road?" "Oh, I'm paving it." She spun on her heel, flouncing back toward her SUV like a villain exiting stage left. Jackson turned, walked back inside, and made one call, to his attorney. 3 days later, everything changed. At the emergency HOA meeting, held in the town hall under fluorescent lights and suffocating tension, Jackson arrived with a file folder thick as a novel. Karen was already seated at the head of the board's makeshift dais, smug in a beige pantsuit. The room buzzed, not with bees this time, but with murmurs, neighbors unsure which way the tide was turning. Jackson approached the podium. "Members of the board, neighbors. For the past few months, I've endured unlawful trespassing, property disputes, and slander, all initiated by this board's president. But I've come here tonight not just to defend myself, but to expose what's been hidden beneath your so-called community planning." He held up the folder. "This is a copy of the original zoning agreement for my land. It clearly states that the parcel was grandfathered in under agricultural exemption. That means no HOA jurisdiction, no shared access, no recreational easements." A gasp rippled through the crowd. He continued, flipping to another document. "Here's a cease and desist letter I'm filing against the HOA for harassment and attempted land seizure. And here," he raised a final sheet, "is a notarized statement from 3 former HOA board members confirming that Karen Withers personally altered the January bylaw updates without full board approval or community voting. That's fraud." Karen stood abruptly, face pale. "That's a lie." "No," Jackson said, locking eyes with her. "That's your legacy." The room erupted, neighbors whispering, phones snapping photos of the documents, a few board members trading glances as if realizing they'd backed the wrong horse. Karen stormed out. Within 24 hours, she was suspended from the HOA board pending investigation. A week later, she resigned. No apology. No farewell post. Just silence. Jackson never celebrated publicly. He went home, fed his animals, checked his hives, and repaired the damage she left behind. Fences, trust, peace. But his message had landed. The HOA, once bloated with entitlement, backed off. New rules were drafted with community input. Access to his ranch was revoked permanently from all documents. And the Clearview Cares banner? It was last seen crumpled in a trash bin outside the clubhouse. One afternoon, as the season turned, and the bees settled back into their steady rhythm, Jackson walked through his field with a small box in hand. Inside were 2 fresh queen bees, symbols of resilience, order, and yes, justice. He released them into the hives, watching as the workers swarmed protectively around their new monarchs. Karen had tried to reign over land she didn't understand. She brought strangers to trample soil they hadn't earned, to treat his home like a playground. She had mistaken politeness for weakness. But Jackson wasn't just a rancher. He was a keeper of land, of life, of quiet strength. And when pushed, he didn't just fight back, he made sure the hive remembered.